So, welcome. My name is Tim Hanlon. I am CEO and founder of a boutique investment advisory and consulting firm out of Chicago called the Vertere Group. I have been in the agency, media, and innovation space for some time prior to that, and have been moderating things like this for Victor and Digital Hollywood for too many years, and I'm happy to be back again. Today's discussion, I thought we had some question from the audience already. Today's conversation is going to be around the online video, digital broadband video space. We clearly recognize, all of us in this room, how online and broadband and digital have changed overall media, but clearly no more pronounced
women 25 to 54, and then the pay services. So in those buckets, we have channels that you may be familiar with, like Nickelodeon, channels in the women's category like OWN Network, and in the pay category, HBO Canada, that we represent. In addition, we have radio stations that we operate, upwards of 50 plus stations in Canada. And my background, and I run content distribution and pay TV. So I'm responsible for getting all of our content that we buy and content that we make distributed out to Canadians, whether that's through our MSOs or online. In the past, I've run the digital group as well. So prior to having joined Corus, I started off in broadcasting, running the digital group at what was Chum Television, and they had such illustrious brands like Much Music and MTV. And we pioneered online. So muchmusic.com back in 1999-2000 was the #1 destination for Canadian youth. And continues to do very well in that space. So we worked a lot with figuring out how to make videos appear on the then limited bandwidth we had available, and also figure out commerce, because we predated iTunes, so we were selling MP3s via that platform back in the day. So that's what I did.
Excellent, thank you. No, I didn't. You weren't the one I.
Jib Jab Media, and some other stuff.
Excellent. Sean.
Lead business development for HSNI, which is actually 8 lifestyle brands, everything from HSN to Front Gate to Chasing Fireflies for children. HSN itself is in 95 million homes, but it's as much digital today as it is television. As a top 10 e-commerce and mobile commerce site. My background, been there 11 years, is actually a story of digital Hollywood. So I told Tim I spent early days sitting and taking notes and studying, and HSN was early on in this because there used to be a lot of talk of rights and DRM. And as a shopping network that paid the distributors, we had full unfettered rights to our content. So we were very early on the first to do live platform to record all our content and put it out. So we were bullish on investments for back end, for video management. And so the fun thing now is in marketing and business development, I'm able to now build really cool partnerships like our one with Univision, Disney, and others on those platforms that I built.
Excellent. Thank you. And last but not least, Tom.
Hey, my name's Tom Bannister, and I founded a company called SXM. We are a digital studio. Back in 2008, we made a very early YouTube series with IKEA that took off, and we've essentially been making online videos since then. Our expertise is on the production side and on the creative development side. We work directly with brands. We work with network partners, and we also produce original programming. Everything we've done has been for the web, about 20 so plus campaigns and productions. And I think that the through line of our work is always trying to find a way to differentiate what we do from film and TV, make it unique for digital, capitalize on the strengths of digital. I think the last 18 months, we've really been trying to partner more and more with brands. Samsung are a big client of ours, and we've been trying to use our expertise in digital video to offer that to brands.
Thank you. So the reason why I forced all of these folks to kind of go through some of that is because we're going to kind of centralize around sort of 4 major thematics, I guess, around sort of this, let's call it this video overlap thing between that of television and that of digital. And what you hear is experience in and around all those different sort of overlapping points. So we're going to get to content and its creation and the production process and the economics of that and stuff. We're going to get to distribution, which I think we kind of really started at when we think about a Chorus and some of the others, and the monetization stuff. We talked about subscription and ad supported, but I want to start with probably the most basic one, right? And that is the consumption behavior thing that we're seeing from consumers. How are people watching, viewing, consuming television/video? And frankly, I'm really interested in all your respective insights as to what you're seeing out there in the real world, because I suspect that that is what is either fueling or your interests and investments and in doing things, or maybe setting your hair on fire to do it more quickly, because the separation between what used to be TV and what used to be digital is no longer evident anymore. So consumers, what are you all seeing from your own perspectives? And again, you're coming from print, I hear coming from classic television, I hear from online creation originally, I hear retrofit, I hear innovation. What are you seeing consumers doing right now? And is it good or bad for your respective businesses?
I can speak from the traditional space.
Go right ahead.
We've done a lot, and we continue to do a tremendous amount of research on what our audiences are doing. You've heard a lot about data today. We are definitely tracking what is happening in that space, even on the distribution side, because I'm responsible for about $350 million in revenue from subscriptions. It's very important to see where those trends are moving. Cord shaving is what is evident. So what we are seeing is people are no longer subscribing to the broadest package. They're being more selective in the channels they choose to watch. And so we are seeing some contraction in the number of services that people will subscribe to. What is interesting is how that and what that is doing to audience levels on the services that people do subscribe to. Those audience levels are holding or growing. So we have not seen an erosion of audiences across the services. So when you talk about viewing and people substituting nonlinear for linear, that is not really manifesting in audience levels on our linear networks. We continue to hold those audiences, which is interesting. Even on HBO Canada, where we have been linear and nonlinear for a very long time now, all of our shows are available on demand very soon after they run on linear. We still see 80% of the viewing on linear, which is a crazy number when you factor in the fact that most of our programming is movies. Tune in at a specific time to watch a specific movie. Well, 80% of the audience is still doing that. That doesn't mean we're not innovating. That doesn't mean we're not launching TV Everywhere apps and continuing to improve our on-demand. But it's kind of a contrarian view because I think people assume that audiences have fragmented so much and have moved to the new media more so than they actually have.
All right, so I have two individual questions here on this. One is that a Canadian thing versus, say, the other things we hear about in the United States, which is far bigger and more complicated and all that? And or two, the measurement and the way you're watching how people are watching, is it accurately keeping up with all these potentially fragmented and time shifted? And when you say on air, does that also mean time shifted?
Correct. So in Canada, we track C+7. I know you do C+3 here, so it's even a more broad metric for us. So maybe that is helping drive what we believe is the linear view. But when you compare it to the States, again, Canada has been aggressively broadband for, I think, a much longer time. As well, there's a lot going on in the regulatory space in Canada that's not happening here with the FCC, where our regulatory body is mandating unbundling of television. There's lots of buzz in Canada about why would you pay $80 a month when you can get, just your basic cable and Netflix for $7. I think even in that climate, we're managing to hold. There's going to be new news coming out in the next couple of weeks from a regulator, which may accelerate some of the cord shaving. But for now, I don't think the distinction is too big between Canada and the US.
Do you guys all see similar consumption behavior issues? Or, some of you are obviously coming at it from originated content from, let's call it, non-classic TV environments. What consumption scenarios are you seeing that are helping or hurting your prospective businesses?
I would say from a Playboy standpoint, the distribution opportunities that are available for media content today are transforming the landscape, and there's never been a better time to have kind of a well-defined brand. And as consumers can go to any platform they want to consume whatever content they choose to consume, brand actually helps you kind of cut through the noise in a way that perhaps didn't matter as much 15 years ago. So for us, it's fueled a transformation of the company away from adult content and away from nudity and into kind of mainstream men's lifestyle content. And the reason is that we can get distribution on platforms that are not open to adult content providers and are closed, in fact, to, they're very, very safe platforms. So if you look at, say, Facebook, where we're one of the top 15 brands on Facebook, if you look at YouTube, if you look at Snapchat, where we're growing our presence there, those platforms are not really open to brands that don't fit the platform and don't develop content specific to that platform. So we're aggressively developing content for each of the platforms that we want to provide content to, and we're going to try to be big wherever big is.
Is that more experimentation on your part, or are you responding specifically to thinking about how your past and potentially future audiences, quote unquote, consume?
We're reaching more men now than any time in the history
Why
of
is that?
Playboy because of social media. The reach of social media, and I include kind of YouTube and other things within that social media bucket, is so gigantic. We're reaching between 70 and 100 million men a month. And the magazine at the peak of its circulation was 7 million men. So there's just a complete difference in the amount of scale that we can get to. But to play by those rules, we have to kind of play on those platforms.
How much of that is video or the permutations of video through digital channels, be it social or the new, one click through Twitter feeds, those kinds of things?
Right. Video is driving our growth. So we've quintupled our traffic to our Playboy.com in the last year by going safe for work, non-nude. But we've 10x'd our video streaming. And we're also growing rapidly across social media for video distribution as well.
And then compared to what we heard on the chorus side of things, does that mean your linear video stuff is waning?
Yeah, we sold the linear video business, the linear TV business. It's still an adult property, right, and we will eventually be kind of out of that business.
Okay.
entirely. So we look at it coming the other way. So we're rebuilding the company sort of from a bottom-up perspective, reaching audiences on new platforms, and then turning that into perhaps OTT, SVOD, other platforms in the future.
It almost sounds like you're going back to the future in some respects, that the original core property was the Playboy magazine and its iterations, right? Television clearly has changed, so you can almost pull it back and then sort of reorganically start again. Not unlike maybe in some respects like people or other print publications that have great brand, to your point, but don't really, you're less so, but magazines historically have not been video companies.
No,
right? So-
because, the core of magazine, newspaper has not been that type of content.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is figure out what type of video works, because it's not traditional TV programming. And Time Inc. just launched the Daily Cut, which is this hub where all the Time properties have video content. And the reason behind it is precisely that we're moving towards making a big hedge on video. And as far as social distribution and video, Facebook and Twitter have made a big push themselves to increase visibility of videos in their platforms and in their algorithms. So by playing to the algorithm and not against it, leveraging that platform and leveraging that visibility by creating content that's organic to those platforms in order to not necessarily just bring traffic from these platforms, because we know they bring a lot of traffic, the social media platforms do, but creating content that's specific to those platforms in order to raise engagement of those communities, which in turn increases visibility and traffic.
Do your readers want video, though, from a quote-unquote magazine or digital online property?
From what we see, yes, they do, but it has to be video that is organically produced and it's relevant to the type of content that we produce. In our case, people is access. We bring people access. We're not gossip. It's not that type of magazine. We bring people access, and having those types of contents and having that type of access, regardless of the platform where we're producing the content, if distributed properly, yes, they want to see it, and yes, they're responding to it.
So guys remaining, what are your consumers, what do the data tell you that's happening with people's expectations of what they're looking for in consuming?
It seems to be somewhat demographically dependent. Younger audiences seem to be more in tune with what's going on mobile and YouTube and shorter form content, social media, and to some degree skew slightly older as you get towards network TV. So I think video consumption kind of depends where you fall in the generational breakdown.
So there's some people in the classic television industry who wonder where all the quote unquote kids ratings went last year, right? Mm-hmm. Some people like to think or want to think that was a cyclical situation and they'll come back. But maybe you're hinting at the fact that perhaps at least that particular age group may have found other ways to watch or consume video without the advertising either attached or monetizable. Is that a fair way to jam a thought into your head?
I wouldn't want to predict what'll happen down the road, but at the moment, yeah, it certainly seems kids and younger kids' consumption habits on YouTube are massive. Moving into early 20s and millennials, it seems to be more of an even split. Still more TV consumption, and then as you get older, I've just had a baby, so just have a night nurse at the moment. She's in her 70s and she just watches CBS nonstop. So finally started watching those shows.
So from where I sit, I've dealt with two very distinct demographics. The first demographic was in my previous job at Crackle. We were targeting guys 18-34 with ad-supported content. Now at Phelan, we're targeting women 35 plus and their families. And we have because we are part of Hallmark, we have a pretty wide range of ages. And I'll say, we have a very broad audience, and they're all online, they're all on devices and mobile, and we don't really see a huge difference in pattern of who's using mobile devices versus who's using online. It's interesting, at Crackle, we would start to see the devices were growing and online, not growing as much because consumers, that demographic, we're transitioning away from online to devices. We see that happening as well at Phelan, although there's, the older demographic is a little more online. But that said, we're seeing a very significant usage. So what I'm saying is it's really, it's gone quite general audience at this point.
So Sean, you've been curiously quiet.
Yeah,
So
to
what
take it
gives
all
you
in.
is the not only that, but also the skate maybe into some of the distribution issues.
Yeah.
Since you come from a more classic realm.
I think one of the biggest shifts for us, and it goes to the shift of the company, HSN, 38 years in business, very successful direct-to-consumer business and retailer. When Mindy Grossman joined from having a brand perspective at Nike and Ralph Lauren, really has spent the last 7 years rebuilding the company as a marketing platform for storytelling and brand building. It's a completely different way of looking at things, as you know, from the advertising space. So that ripples through everything, right? That ripples through your sets, through your talent, through your way you bring things to life. And I think that influences how we look at video. And back in the day, we tend to categorize video, and a lot of this is driven by metadata platforms that say, okay, this is a short form or long form, or this is a educational piece versus a selling piece or an advertising or whatever. We look at it more kind of now in the consumer's mind and that funnel. So there's things that are for awareness, and it actually is like a bell curve. That would be like our partnership with AOL, which was interesting. First time somebody approached us for the value of our content in and of itself, nothing to do with commerce or monetization. It was certain pieces of content we put out are as interesting to watch as ESPN or Wall Street Journal or any of our people in their platform that's on their homepage every week. The middle is engagement. That's still the biggest part, and that's where you are trying to test if a video is by a product, what is the uplift in conversion, and then also how long is somebody engaging. And the last is generosity. So part of our brand promise is we give people things and not expect in return, which is different for a retailer. It's like our arcade that we launched. And so there you think more like this would be a partnership with Hallmark, where what are the kind of things that the consumer's looking for, and there's no sell, there's nothing, and you're giving something back to them. And then for the last piece underneath of that, we look at multicultural. And so if you look at Google's particularly put a lot of stats out, both Hispanics and African Americans, sometimes 2-3x engagement with online video, digital video, and social. And so knowing that that's a powerful way to reach the fastest growing audience in the US, how do you then, and now you have language, you have a lot of content issues you have to think through in distribution. So for us, it's more starting with that, because if you bucket things that way, that drives how you think about metrics, that drives how you think about funding the content. So it's just a different way to look at it.
So that sounds almost responsive to how the audiences are changing. So instead of distribution, let's skate actually into content, because you kind of brought it up. So everything old is new again. In many respects, branded content is sort of all the rage right now. There is that fine line between quote unquote editorial and or advertorial advertising, right? And I think in video and television in particular, video/television for this conversation, well, look, I think there is a fine line between those two sort of worlds, right? Which arguably have been somewhat sacrosanct until fairly recently. Some cynically could say it's never been that way, but let's go with that theory for a second. So is this the best of times or the worst of times when it comes to this thinking as a media company, right? Because to basically say that to marketers that you can create, and as a studio, Tom, of course, you could probably vouch for this too, that you can create your own messaging and get them out there with or without a media partner can be great, or it could also be fraught with peril, because there is also this possibility that consumers just may not, quote unquote, trust it, either because of the quality issue or because it may be perceived as disingenuous and or advertising, i.e. not editorial. So I'll throw this sort of jump ball up is the world of the quote unquote advertorial, this mix between, this commingling of what used to be known as advertising or editorial, is that a good thing content-wise, right? I got to think that there are some business reasons why all of you are thinking about how that lives in your business pipelines.
I would say
maybe we'll start with Tom Ollie, because
Okay.
he's Mr. Content guy, right?
Thank you.
Sorry.
I think it depends on the kind of content. I think entertainment content can probably get away with less of a church and state. News and the New York Times and this kind of thing. I think probably it should have more of a church and state. I think that there's a lot of advertising disguised as entertainment, and a lot of branded entertainment that you see at the moment. A lot of these 3-minute videos and 4-minute videos are really just advertising. They don't really have many entertainment qualities at all. And I think I find myself often in a lot of conversations where the brand's like, oh, we've got to keep it short, because we've got to get our message early on because we know they're going to tune out. And they're going to tune out because it's advertising, not entertainment. So I think that the branded entertainment is kind of a phrase, but I think that it's still very much just advertising in new media. I think that there are some really, really strong examples of true branded entertainment. Funnily enough, I think the latest one is probably the Power Rangers movie, short film, the fan film. That is true entertainment, that's truly effective, but I think overall, and this is in the entertainment realm rather than the news realm, I think that these branded entertainment productions really have to have more entertainment quality about them than they currently do in general.
Can they coexist?
I was going to say, I think, the thing that makes branded content effective is that it's content first. If it's branded content where the brand is what's forward, it just doesn't work for the audience. I think audiences are very sophisticated now. And I don't think audiences particularly care if it's paid for or sponsored or there's a sponsor integrated into it if it's entertaining content. So, the way that we look at it is we do a lot of branded content deals as part of our sort of advertising strategy, is that we're trying to make great content for our audience. And again, this is where having this kind of defined brand position that we've got, who our audience is, who we reach, who engages with our content, makes us an attractive branded content partner for advertisers, because if they want to reach that audience with an entertaining message or with some way to get kind of their brand infused into it, they're basically renting a little piece of our brand to go along with their brand.
Okay, but be careful, and I think you guys are going to respond to this, because in the realm of, let's say, classic television, right, which has a bunch of regulatory issues around it, around this sort of church and state thing, paid programming and being full disclosure, there seem to be, yes, that's leaking over time, but in the realm of online video, it's a purely digital thing. I think it is much more Wild West, right? Because I do think it's not as clear and distinctive as to what is quote unquote editorial content, what is advertising.
Most things online are Wild West.
Okay, so please explain that, because I think it's an important distinction when we're talking about a collision course here.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I think there's a difference between advertorial content, which is advertorial content, and what we're calling content marketing or sponsored content. And like he said, it's about the value of the content, and the church and state line, regardless of the type of publication or the type of brand, ultimately is defined by editorial guidelines and editorial integrity. And when we're talking about strictly news brands, it's harder. It's a harder editorial integrity line that it's more difficult to work around or to try to bridge that gap than with other brands that are more entertainment based or more lifestyle based.
But I got to think in the ad magazine space, especially the People, which has had its, over the decades, it's sort of skirting between, it's editorial, right? It's
editorial, and at the end of the day, what we're building are contents that are going to be entertaining, that are going to be informative, that are going to be whatever the editorial line of that particular brand is. In our case, it has to be entertaining, it has to be, it has to have some standards. It can't be sold are wanting to promote, which is that goodwill that the brand has.
Sam, you were at Crackle, now you're at Hallmark. I'm sure you've seen some of those compromisable conversations, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, when you're at a ad-supported video on demand, your editorial voice is always, has to balance out the advertising interest, and you have to balance that. Now at Phelan, we have a really family-friendly, very advertiser-friendly service, targeting that mom 35 plus. The irony is we're not advertising supported, we are a subscription business. So that's why I put on my partnership hat and I think about how can I go to a traditional advertiser, a brand, and think about how can I enable them to bring the entertainment experience to their consumers. Maybe that's enabling them to present, to subsidize a month of service or something like that. And so that way they get the benefit of the Hallmark sensibility, of our brand sensibility, without being a quote unquote advertiser. And then separately, you already mentioned it earlier today about, maybe there's content that would be relevant to our users that could be, from a brand, but again, it wouldn't be advertising, it would just be a brand. If this is a horrible example for us, but like a Red Bull entertainment type, is better for like a Crackle audience. But if you think about that type of content, again, at the end of the day, if it's content that is going to be compelling, that's the most important thing.
I was going to say, I agree with everything that Chato said, and I also think that what she's touching on, I don't want to put words in your mouth,
No,
the way
but-
that I look at it is,
Go ahead, it's more fun that way.
in terms of authority. And so like, why are these brands trying to reach our audience? It's because we're an authority on things that are interesting to men.
Absolutely.
So if we're compromising our authority by doing something editorially that's branded in a way that doesn't work with the voice that we have, that's a detriment to our own long-term interests. So the reason that these brands want access to our audience is precisely because we actually present content with authority.
Yeah.
So it's about attaching ourselves to that. And I'm glad that Sam brought up Red Bull, because Red Bull is a great example of why this doesn't really matter anymore. Red Bull has an audience and an authority in the content that they've been creating. I think they're doing a fantastic job reaching their core audience. And obviously this is to build the brand of Red Bull and to reach young men and their core demographic, but they're creating great entertainment content.
But that is diametrically opposed to what you just said, right?
Not really.
Well, hold on. Here's my thought, right? Because in essence, what advertisers, especially in television, have done over the years is rent the audiences that you have lovingly curated and editorially, high-barred, if you will, and sold those audiences as being worthy of that advertiser's time and attention that only you, in theory, can deliver. When you talk about stuff like branded content, like a Red Bull, right? That's a conscious decision to create content and distribute outwardly, with or without a media company attached to it.
I think you're presuming in your statement that one, you're presuming sort of a mutual exclusivity to those concepts, which I don't think there is.
Okay.
And two, you're presuming that people are as good at it as Red Bull is. And I'm standing an outlier, sort of, and I think that there might be other people who could probably attack that problem in a similar way. But I think it's going to be very, very difficult for most brands to be able to go at it that hard.
I get one last thing, and then I'll let you respond. My thought is that I think that Red Bull and the former BMW films and all these other things that have coursed through back and forth over the years have given marketers a bit more of a glimmer in their eye that they aren't necessarily having to just buy 30-second commercials in rented spaces for editorial environments like TV networks and stations and programs, et cetera, that they can feel somehow maybe more liberated in a more liberated way to create, hopefully, quality content and distribute it themselves. I guess the key point is, with or without a media company and its content and its programming attached.
So I'm just going to jump in as the
And that's a
traditional.
huge issue, isn't it, right?
Well, the traditional spot is definitely under siege, especially as we go across these platforms. You mentioned off the top being able to track the metrics associated with tracking our online viewing it just simply isn't there to measure it in the same way. And when we look at what our advertisers need from us, I think both are going to coexist. All we've heard about at this conference is Red Bull, GoPro, and BMW films from 10 years ago, right? So there are a tremendous amount of brands out there that have tried to do their own content and failed, and they do need to partner with people who are experts. So whether those experts are traditional media companies who have always done these integrated marketing campaigns and have always been very cognizant of not compromising the integrity of the entertainment value, because if you do that, you will not generate the impressions or the value for the advertiser that they ultimately seek. So it becomes a circular discussion. And there always is this pushback between the ad sales group and our content creators when they're integrating these brands natively into the content. But I think both exist. And I think the large majority of advertising, although we are seeing shifts to online and shifts to now having this big voice for integrated marketing and branded entertainment, there'll be a balance between the two. And, the advertising model needs to change. It needs to innovate too. Just as the content is innovating, how advertisers reach their audiences will need to innovate, but we can all coexist together.
I think you're right. I think it's hard to standardize it either in terms of regulation or in terms of what a brand's going to want. I think for some brands, working with a network and working with a curator is the best way to go. For some, being the filmmaker and being their own network and production entity is the best way to go. And then on the standardization of regulations, it again depends on the brand. A pharma brand you might want more clarification, or a brand targeting kids than a brand which is in a different category, like a toy brand or a video game brand, where there's less of a boundary between the entertainment and the marketing. So I think it's hard to kind of put an overall classification on a kind of mass movement of what a brand is wants or doesn't want. And I think that's probably part of the change from TV to digital. You could in the past do that. That's what television was. It was a very standardized approach. With digital, it's not. And I think that's part of what makes it so interesting.
Where is the equilibrium then? I mean, let's assume that it's not digital versus television. It's actually just one big vat of video. Let's assume that for a second, because I think we're kind of in that mosh pit.
Yeah,
anyway.
take platform out of the equation.
So where is that equilibrium? Where do you see advertisers' marketing budget, or marketers' advertising budgets, right? Do you see it still disproportionately going to 30-second rented environments with increasing pods and clutter, or do you see it more towards the original content and I'll take my own chances? Or where is the equilibrium?
Yeah, there's going to be a shift, definitely, in how the ad dollars get dispersed. And
is
again, agencies
is it by advertising vertical or marketing category, or maybe that's part of it too?
I think the issue is going to be what the ad agency's role is going to be in the future as we move forward. I mean, the client direct, and we talked earlier about one of the brands having an in-house team of 75 people, basically a mini production studio in-house to create the content that they make. I'm not sure if it was Red Bull, but the lines are going to blur just as they are with content, and who are content creators. It's everybody, as you've mentioned now. So where it shifts will be all about how quickly we as broadcasters will also shift what we're doing. One of the notes I wrote down just as the beginning of the panel is we have an integrated marketing team at Chorus who has traditionally worked with integrating brands in the shows that we create, but why that team wouldn't also be creating bespoke content for our brands that we work with that may or may not be related to our shows that we then also air on TV as content. Why that doesn't happen now, there's no reason for it.
But that seems to be a trend too. Media companies creating their own quote unquote creative services. They've always had that, but
Yeah.
ad-like agency services, either to work in conjunction with said agency or despite said agency.
Yeah, or directly with clients, which is where a lot of the action's happening now. I mean, marketers, you mentioned, is this a challenge or an opportunity? It's a tremendous opportunity. I think the whole market, everyone's been elevated. We're all so much smarter. CMOs at these brands traditionally had sort of ticked a box on a checklist of things they needed to do, which is, do some content. And they would put a cereal box in a show. Now I think everyone's getting far more savvy with the tools they have available.
Sophisticated, yeah.
Yeah, and sophisticated with the tools they have available and how their audiences are shifting. So we're letting the audience lead us. And I think as broadcasters, traditionally, when we make content, that's what we've done. We've led the audiences in certain instances, but really we watch where they go and make sure we're one step ahead of them before they take their next step. So advertising will do the same, and it needs to.
There's also a lot more data that we have because of the digital platforms in order to inform decisions, and we make a lot less gut decisions and a lot more data-driven decisions. And we need to continue moving in that direction in order to not try to catch up to the audience, but try to anticipate where they're going next and and try to get there before, because traditionally we have been following where the audience moves, and we need to anticipate where they're going.
Okay, so now we're speaking of anticipating and skating to where the puck is going, to use Wayne
Wayne
Gretzky's
Gretzky.
overused analogy. So let's talk about the monetization thing, because that's where you slap the puck towards, unbeknownst to you. A lot of what you just described, and the idea of creating, having a creative services or agency-like function, which sounds almost like table stakes now for media companies. It sounds a lot more complicated than how the revenue was, which was ad sales team, selling spots and dots, Nielsen or Nielsen-like ratings, efficiencies of such upfront, all that sort of traditional classic television valuation / nonsense, okay? Because it becomes more consultative and a little bit more proprietary and data-driven and by hand oriented, and you get a lot more ideas and creativity and possibilities. Does that actually make, so you say it's opportunity, I actually will cynically say that actually sounds more complicated and a higher cost of revenue.
You would be correct, sir.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, your margins definitely.
First time today, I assure
Yeah,
you.
I mean, we can talk with anybody who produces content. The margins on content production are far lower, but it's where we need to move. And if we can create the efficiencies in-house to do it better than other studios or other groups, then that's where we will win in the long run. But in the short term, there is a tremendous amount of complexity in broadcasting. We used to say that, the deals I used to do on the distribution side were 5-year deals. They'd be done over the course of 3 months, and then you'd go golfing. Now it's like years, and you're constantly iterating on the deal you just did because something new's come along. So listen, it's coming to the ad part of the business as well.
Well, so let's talk about how revenues are generated, right? So subscription, advertising.
It's about 50-50. So
Okay.
50% of our revenue, as a rough marker, will come from subscriptions, and 50% of our revenue will come from ad sales.
Is that similar to what you all see as well? And or where's the velocity headed? Either side. Because I think back 10 years ago, I remember vividly an Economist article, and this happens every 5 or 7 years or so, where there's this sort of thematic about media. What is the tipping point between ad-supported / free and subscription-based, i.e. no advertising, right? Or frankly, now maybe hybrids. But there seems to be kind of a cyclicality to that, where subscription becomes in vogue and then ad support kind of comes back in vogue. And I wonder, as a scene setter here, as we get into more, especially in the United States, certainly Canada too, I call it the great unbundling.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about the economics of that in a second, but if consumers are being tempted to get smaller packages of bundles of programming and content, okay, let's assume that the temptation at least is there. That's clearly going to be a challenge, at least to the presumption of being paid by carriers, by network operators for content, or is it at least it's going to split it up. It doesn't mean high unending growth, right? But now, so I throw that into the mix about advertising, subscription, pay for. What are your respective mixes looking like?
I would say, just from a pure digital standpoint, that what we're looking at is right now it's certainly tipped toward advertising, and the reason that I would say that is
tip towards advertising.
Yeah, and the reason I would say that is that you're looking at 2-3 orders of magnitude more audience that you can reach and build by having free content that is ad supported, just because of the amount of distribution. There's sort of a land grab for distribution going on right now among brands, publishers, et cetera. So I think on the pure digital side, it's a much more attractive time. Unless you have a very compelling content offering like a Netflix or something, it's very hard to break through on the subscription side of things.
Do you think that's because your heritage as Playboy?
Well, we
more niche to start?
certainly, speaking from a Playboy standpoint, absolutely.
Is it short form content? So I was going to neutralize for platform, and I was going to go towards short form versus long form to answer your question, where I would say the more short form content, the more advertising supported. The more long form the content, the more subscription based. Yeah. And I would even say, I run HBO Canada. I'm anti commercials in my content. I just think it detracts from that whole experience. So again, the subscriber fee is high. So there's this kind of sliding scale. Subscriber fees go down, the shorter form the content, and the advertising goes up. So I think that's kind of a balance. And maybe
I think that's right. Yeah.
From where I sit, again, having been in both AVOD and SVOD, you see there's about 100, I think you mentioned it several times, there's a multiplication factor of people you can reach if you're on ad supported. But the other thing is obviously revenue. And from us as content owners, it's really crucial that you have a compelling targeted offer. And when you have that offer, subscription can really be significant revenue relative to advertising. Maybe figure lifetime value of a customer ad support is about 1% of what it is for a subscription service. And when you think about what that means, you can really invest much more into serving that consumer. And that's what we found. And you think about there's advantages and disadvantages to both. If you're on AVOD, it's a much, as you mentioned, lower barrier to entry for the customer. A lot of these services, you don't have to even put in your email address, let alone a credit card. But then again, you're going to have more churn for that same reason. You may not have a great way to reach them. You're not top of mind every month for them. So your churn is going to be considerably larger. Whereas you have someone who buys into a subscription, you're providing them a valuable service month after month, your churn kind of takes care of itself in a way as people really want to make good on the money they're spending on your service, self-fulfilling in a way. So that's some of the ways I've seen it.
Advertising seems to be less secure in a way. Like advertisers shift what they want every year. Hot networks come and go. It's really risky to build a business just dependent on advertising. So, to have paying consumers, if you can get to that, I think is really, really powerful.
Let me go one step further. So there is a theory out there that, we're kind of, the television industry historically has sort of been predicated on being sort of the ad value of television has been historically rooted in the fact that it has historically been a scarce resource, right? Quality channels, and only in the last dozen years or so have we gotten hundreds of channels and lots of choice. But as we've done that, we've also it's become more of an age of abundance, right? Where there are just lots of smaller but yet proliferated places to watch and consume content. And if all of them are selling advertising, right, to smaller and smaller audiences, there is a diaspora of not only quality content, but audiences, right? So can ad support alone run one's business, and or will people subscribe to hundreds and hundreds of,
I would call the great unbundling that you referenced earlier the great rebundling, because I think that, so I was saying before, I think on the pure digital side, you're able to aggregate these huge audiences sort of through ad-supported free content right now, but you want to lever yourself into a subscription business, I think, based on what we were talking about earlier. But the opportunity to do that will come about as sort of you have your traditional kind of linear MVPD business and sort of your newer emerging rebundle. If people knew how much they paid and they were able to choose individual channels, they wouldn't pay for any of them. But when you can go back into a new kind of bundle and you can provide a bunch of, say, digital first or digital only services combined with more traditional linear programming, and you can say, yes, I'd like that bundle, or I want these things. I think the array of choices that will be happening through MVPDs, through virtual MVPDs, and that's what's very exciting to me, because I think bundling is still a great value for consumers, but the bundling that exists today is not a great value.
And also there's more alternatives, but there's also more targeted alternatives. There's less general public contents or brands or channels, and more niche publications or channels or content, which some advertisers may be more connected to or maybe more attracted to. So at the end of the day, we go back to the quality of the content and having the brand represent the voice and be targeted to the correct audience.
You said data, and I thought you were going to go in a direction, but I'll pull you there anyway. A distinction between television today and digital video today, right, is, I think, this ability to at least begin to apply data, first, third-party data, whatever, things from the world of digital, right, targeting and audience-based buying, et cetera. It is preliminarily available in digital video. It is largely not available in television. Right? I think we can all agree on that. Now, if we agree on our previous thing where the digital video and television is combining into one big pot of video, does data, how does television sort of get with the digital video, data-driven kind of program, so to speak, and maybe unlock some of more of this advertising attractiveness, right? Which isn't selling big boxes of males 18 to 49, but more targeted. Yeah. How do you think that looks?
I can give you an interesting example on that. So I think digital has unlocked what were maybe previously a lot of forced, unnatural, right, ecosystem and distribution. We've all watched that maybe not change as quickly as we thought it would, but it's certainly changing. I think that means new entrants to the equations, and as a marketer, as a brand, or even an agency, you've got different options. So for instance, you wouldn't think of HSN as a platform, right, for a brand for advertising, right? Maybe for they want to sell a product or whatever. We had this, and these are one of the fastest areas of our business and growth with Toyota a couple of years ago. I can't go into too much of the details, but they had a specific attitudinal messaging brand thing they needed to accomplish with women, right? And so we had that audience. We had a very targeted audience. They couldn't do that with 30-second spots, right? Or they would be very inefficient over time. So we sort of, and then on our end, we couldn't just run an hour-long form. It would be disingenuous to our customer, right? We would lose that brand value. So we created this very interesting programming. We went and studied our customer. For our customer, one of their number one or two most hated things each year is to go to a car dealership. And so now you've got this interesting mix. Toyota wants to reach women. Our women have a lot of, in general, with the industry. And so we had Kelley Blue Book on, we had vroomgirls.com. The whole hour was not just featuring a particular hybrid or message they wanted to get across to women, but it was about education. And at the end of it, if they bought a car within 30 days from a dealership, mailed back to HSN, they got a $1,000 gas card or a $1,000 gift card. Dealer doesn't know anything about it, so you're gonna reel $1,000 off. Now you've gone full circle, consumer value, direct to consumer. They can now measure not only, and we did pre-post surveys, so they can do the attitudinal stuff, but all the way through to direct response. How many cars bought, how many were conquests. There's not too many other platforms where you get that mixture, and we're just one example, but I think you're gonna see more and more new entrants that give. Saatchi won an award for that. So it was in the very traditional line of big brand, big agency, but completely new platform.
It also sounds to me like you delved into this historic other box of marketing dollars, which is in the agency world known as derisively below the line, right?
Yeah.
Not brand advertising and audience and impressions,
Yeah.
but ROI driven stuff like costs per and lead generation and promotional things.
Sample.
Whole big, disproportionately
Conversions.
larger box of dollars that you may, as a quote unquote TV or media property, have never touched before, right? Courtesy of, your point, data,
Data.
right? Data bringing that up.
That's right.
Of course, do you see any of those possibilities popping up? Do any of your business development / salespeople embrace that sort of holistic kind of opportunity from where your legacy business started from?
Definitely. So we've actually reorganized our sales team to better capitalize on opportunities that may present themselves for our businesses across the genres. So we had typically structured ourselves across vertical lines for kids, women, so selling a particular demographic. We have a team now that's dedicated to looking at holistic opportunities for brands across our services. So for sure, those opportunities exist. I think going back to your question on data and how that may change in broadcasting, the MSOs and MVPDs have a tremendous amount of data off those set-top boxes. So it's unleashing that data and allowing people to monetize it and learn from it. We currently don't have access to it, so we are B2B as a broadcaster. We sell to cable companies and satellite companies. They end up having that direct relationship with the subscriber or the end consumer. So we are separated from that data. But interestingly, we've done our own studies and have learned that even the BBM Nielsen tracking of audience, which is a select group, and so in Canada, I think it's 1,500 people. And so we always used to joke when our ratings went down, oh, that woman went back to work on Monday, right? So, but we did track it.
The sample is 1,500 homes.
Yeah, the sample's small, which seems small, and
And
you're like, how
projected
could that,
against a user base of how much?
30 million? Well, 10 million households.
I'm no statistician, but.
Yeah, but we did track it. And after all of the work that went into that and actually tracking set-top data, it was pretty accurate. So it may all just be a whole lot of much ado because the data is pretty clear. It's just what you can get. We're
And
limited.
Even accounting for the fractionalized viewing behaviors and on-demand and time-shifted and device-centric and interesting.
Yeah, and so even our research guide would always say some of our services generate such low audience that it's not statistically relevant. So it's not statistically
Okay,
relevant.
but others could
yeah.
say, especially in a bigger market like the US, that there is gold in them, there are smaller hills.
Yeah.
And it's just that the current system of measurement or currency
That's right.
doesn't hear it, right? It's like
Right.
the proverbial tree falling in a forest and no one's there to hear it, doesn't
For
make
sure.
noise.
Yeah.
There are a lot of interesting tech companies that are trying to, just like digital display 15 years ago, trying to basically capture all those little pieces of audiences
Rentrack.
from those smaller networks
Yeah.
and aggregate them into an ad network.
Yeah, for sure. On the pay side, for example, too, like I don't know the lifetime value of my customer. You know, we retail at $18 a month for Movie Central, HBO Canada. I have no data on these people. So when I'm trying to innovate my own packaging to keep pace with the market and the Netflixes and whoever else might be launching in our space, it's very challenging to be competitive when you're kind of operating blind. So we really value our partnerships with the cable companies to extract as much knowledge as we can.
So the one thing in media, right, you have data, there tends to be a lot of data that's possible,
Yeah.
if you can get it or not, right, another
Yeah.
question. But a lot of the data, quote unquote, that we've used actually as currency has been relatively narrow and some would argue monopolistic, right, in sort of a Nielsen type system, right, where we optimize ratings and on media front versus things like impact and ROI and other data-driven stuff. So I guess my question on this front is, how and when does data become more like currency, or is that really the wrong question when maybe we don't need that ratings translation currency as much as we just need the data to go directly from what a marketer wants to do and the avails that are out there, right? Media ratings being what media buyers tend to trade off of. I wonder if that middle component, that translation layer, kind of dissipates like we see it online when we don't need to translate it to a rating and then buy it. We can maybe go directly to the properties themselves using more granular data and monetize it that way.
It may be a lot like what's happening on the web, where you talk about your RTB stuff. You do need that information to sell spots and dots and that kind of, but as you move into partnering with brands like Playboy, like Hallmark, like People, like Chorus's channels, it maybe becomes less relevant. And it's up to us to make sure we're curating those audiences that are more valuable or of higher value than probably the mass that you could still monetize through traditional metrics.
And I think data is probably at its most valuable when it specifically allows you to target the customer that's most likely to buy your product and then convert them at the exact moment that they're most likely to buy it. So it's data's not just about a profile on someone, it's about understanding their behavior on an ongoing basis and then messaging them at the key moment and converting them into actually purchasing your product. I think that's what Google does better than everyone else. And to some degree, I think we have to start doing it with branded entertainment. Certainly in brand conversations that we've been having at the moment, ROI, and it's not just brand marketing, ROI and proving that what you have done, this show that you have made, is crucial in selling it. And then even if you make a season one or a first iteration of it, proving that actually sold product is crucial in getting the brand to reinvest and continue the initiative beyond one campaign cycle. So figuring out actually how did this video or how did this campaign actually directly convert someone to buy a product, I think is becoming crucial in getting brands to invest more in branded entertainment.
I would take that all the way. Obviously, as one who does that conversion and sells that product, I can't talk too much about it, but there's several media companies that we're working with to say with an ad unit, traditional digital ad unit, and say if we sub in a video or if we sub in a distributed commerce experience where somebody could view something, check out without ever leaving that site, going off to a retailer or whatever, what are the economics of that cost per whatever?
Right.
And in some cases, a non-advertising experience is much more valuable.
And proving the value of television/video much like digital is being asked or higher barred to prove ROI, right? Because it's one thing, if ROI is simply ratings and audience, right, which is a media metric, right? That's one thing, but the actual ability to sell or prove sales or prove qualified leads or getting names and addresses for future marketing and CRM, those are much more granular and much more truly
If you think about it, it's what Canute, the wonders tried to do with interactive advertising for the whole industry, right? For a couple of years was the holy grail was the over the 30-second, but then the direct fulfillment. Well, you can do that online easily all day.
All right, time for a few questions for whoever wants to, yell BS at any of us up here. We'll subject ourselves to that for the last 7 to 8 minutes. So please, any questions from the audience on what we've been skating around? For those who are just waking up, welcome. Please don't be shy. Yeah, go ahead. You'll need to, you got a microphone. Just also tell us where you're from, so we get an idea of where your questions come from.
Yeah, my name is Ashim. I'm from the business school student at the Kellogg School of Management. I had questions a little bit specifically for Sam, but around, you mentioned you had spent, before at Hallmark, you were at Crackle, and I think about, I watched all of Seinfeld's Comedians with Coffee, with Cars Getting Coffee, and specifically, the partnership you did there with Acura, those commercials, those Acura ads are actually really entertaining, and I found out later that Seinfeld actually helped write them. Can you talk a little bit about when you were going, when you're developing that series with Seinfeld, how that kind of progressed, where you brought Acura in, and then he was open to maybe writing for them or helping them integrate it, and even the shorts have the cars in them, and he'll literally be like, this is a placement, and the celebrity will be like, oh really, that's a placement? It's like an Acura just sitting there in the middle, and then they'll go on. And so I found it very innovative, very interesting, and very entertaining. And going back to what you guys were talking about, how the branded content needs to be entertaining first. So can you talk a little bit about how that developed and the lessons learned from that?
Wow. First, I just want to say I have to be really careful because there's a lot of confidential information there. So I can't really speak more from a consumer standpoint, to be honest. I think that Seinfeld was really excited about the project and the opportunity to get into the non-conventional space, but he did bring some conventional relationships with him, and I think Acura, is one of those. So maybe I'll dodge the question a little bit to avoid confidential issues. But
I can address a little bit there are agencies that are specifically devoted to this idea of quote unquote branded entertainment or branded content, and I would argue a lot of it tends to be very forced and or artificial and or not always well executed, because there is a translation error between what an agency can do and then ultimately what the producers, the writers, the directors can or want to do. I think in this case, and I'll speak for you, not independently. I think you had a rare but perhaps increasing scenario where you had a talent and the people involved in the creation of the show who were not only open to the idea, but had gotten some level of buy-in, if you will, from the advertiser for a little creative license, right? Always probably with that approval thing, right? But also a recognition that, Seinfeld and his team are they're not gonna sugarcoat, right? You want our sensibility, you're gonna get our sensibility. We know where hopefully the line is not crossed, and maybe you're gonna tell us maybe we do cross the line a little bit. But to me, that's almost like kismet, right? And again, I think it's rare. And I do think, though, that it becomes less rare over time, especially in predominantly online video environments where the rules and the oversight and the standards and practices and the overhang of traditional television don't get as much in the way. I think just the fact that it came from sort of the ground up, albeit within a Sony environment, allowed a lot more flexibility from the beginning for that conversation and that mutual partnership and creativity to happen. The more classically television, I think it's harder.
I think what you're saying is Jerry Seinfeld's a unique person and was making his first show since the most popular comedy in the history of television. So
it's a lot of leverage there, right?
A lot of power. And also his relationship with Sony, distributing Seinfeld, that's, been very beneficial to him.
And as far as the
mutually beneficial over the years.
much the language of that programming. And it's not the accurate show, and it's not it's a Seinfeld production, and you see it, and it's his tone, it's his voice, and it's very true to it. So to what he was saying, there has to be some leeway, and if the brand wants to be associated with Seinfeld and his personal brand, that's why it works.
Time for one more question.
Well,
Go ahead.
With regard to Playboy.
Where are you from? Sorry.
I'm a journalist, so I do a bunch of things.
Good enough.
With regard to Playboy and rebranding or exploiting social media where you can't be your originating brand concept, have you gone back to the magazine and revisited some of the ideas that they've had? Like, they were always great in terms of publishing science fiction writers, or Little Annie Fanny or things like that, which weren't as, shall we say, as risque as some of the other elements. Are those being revisited and rebranded or used for social media? Because I see the incredible opportunities in taking the, like they used to say, oh, I don't look at the I'm not there for the pictures, I just read the articles, but in this case, this is a time where those articles could be, there was a whole series of ideas and concepts that had been in Playboy that I was surprised they didn't do more with in those days, but now is the opportunity.
I mean, what you're saying essentially is that Playboy was the original link bait. So you buy it for one
Good
reason,
point.
perhaps you consume it for other reasons. I think that, our challenge and our opportunity online and in the digital space is to be relevant. And, when we look at the history of sort of the print publication, that publication became less and less relevant to the audience that we were trying to reach over time. And so we're always trying to address sort of the relevance of our media, depending on whatever platform it's on, we want to be relevant. And so, certainly what we've updated in terms of our sensibility in going online is we've updated the way that we present models, we've updated the way that we present content, and we've most updated the sensibility of the humor, which I think you would see the starkest contrast between sort of our online efforts and the magazine efforts. Very, very different humor sensibility. Magazines have things like cartoons and jokes and things like that that reach perhaps a different audience than the one that we're going for online. Online humor is a major form of currency for sharing in social media. So, we certainly look at the things that other people who produce sites for men look at, like breakup texts and, Tinder fails and things like that. And that's content that's incredibly relevant to the young men that are on, our digital platforms. And I think that sensibility update will eventually make its way back into the magazine as well. But magazines take a little bit more time to kind of produce and collate. I do think that the heritage of the magazine does allow for a vast array of permissions for us as a brand and as a publisher. We can really address any topic that's interesting to men. We can address spirits, we can address women, we can address art, we can address culture. And I think there are very few brands that have that breadth of addressability. I think that's also a challenge in that we can address so many things that we have to let the ideas and what's interesting and what's relevant really lead the way for us.
Unfortunately, we got to leave it there. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it, and all of your attendance. I appreciate that too. Thank you.